Okay, welcome to the next video in week 3 of term 3. This is the last type of learning that you need to learn about, which is observational learning. So we've already done a SAC on classical conditioning. The last video was on operant conditioning, and this one's on observational learning. Always doesn't work to start with. Okay, so Albert Bandura is the person who's the key researcher here, and we'll read through Bandura's full experiment in class. But just a basic overview is that he had children in the experiment who observed adults. The adults were both males and females. The children watched some be aggressive and some not aggressive towards a particular doll, which he called the Bobo doll. And then he put the children in a room and watched their behaviour. And basically they found that children who watched an aggressive model tended to be more aggressive themselves. The other interesting point was that they found that female children were more likely to imitate a female model, and male children were more likely to imitate a male model. So the idea of observational learning is that you learn by watching others' behaviours, and we know that classical and operant conditioning can both occur through observational learning, so you don't need to go through the learning directly yourself. You can go through it vicariously, which means by watching others. Which means another term for observational learning is vicarious learning. And basically, the observer will model the behaviour, or it would be called modelling when they actually display the behaviour. They don't always have to display the behaviour. Sometimes it might remain latent, which means it basically can just sit there in their mind, and they can display it at any time that they want. And they'll make a choice about whether they want to display this behaviour or not. Basically, there's 5 steps in the process of observational learning. If you have a look at the ARRMR, people tend to remember it as armourer, so a really bad way of spelling the word arm. And you need to know these 5 steps and be able to apply it to any situation. So attention, we must pay attention to the person who's showing us the behaviour and the consequences. So for instance, if someone's teaching you to tie your shoelaces, you need to actually watch them tie their shoelaces and see the consequence of the fact that they've got their shoelaces tied at the end of it and can walk comfortably in their shoes. Certain people will pay more attention to. We tend to pay attention to people of the same sex of us, similar in age, perhaps someone we look up to, sometimes someone who's quite attractive. There's lots of things that can influence this attention step. Once we've paid attention, we then need to retain the information, hence the second step is retention. It needs to be stored in our memory, so therefore we can do it later on our own. Reproduction is we need to be physically and intellectually able to put this into an action. So for instance, you might think you can teach a 2-year-old to tie their shoelaces, but they probably don't have the fine motor movement. So it doesn't matter how many times you make them sit there and observe it, it's not going to help. The next thing is that the person must be motivated to want to imitate the behaviour. So if there's no incentive or they don't want to, they can sit, they can watch, they could reproduce, but they might choose not to, because realistically they don't care whether they can tie their shoelaces or not. So there needs to be sometimes some internal motivation, or perhaps sometimes the person who's been observed can provide some external motivation, perhaps a lolly at the end of it, which is where the reinforcement comes in. So if something positive happens at the end of the behaviour, then the learner is more likely to imitate the behaviour. So for instance, in tying shoelace, well, the positive outcome or the reinforcement is that, you can walk around and you don't have to rely on your parents to tie your shoes, and you're going to be able to wear your shoes very comfortably. Okay. Now, observational learning is a bit different to the other types in that observational learning doesn't involve direct learning experiences like operant and classical conditioning does. So it's often what we call indirect learning. In operant conditioning, there's a link between the learning and performance. So, for instance, a response is shown and then we give a consequence and the learner sees the link and decides whether to perform it. But in observational learning, you can learn something, but then actually choose not to perform it. So, I might know how to serve a tennis ball, but I've not played tennis, so therefore I don't perform the skill. Observational learning requires a lot of thinking, so a lot of choice, whereas you tend to find that classical and operant conditioning, well, classical definitely doesn't have any choice, but operant doesn't often involve a lot of choice or conscious thinking either. It just tends to happen. But it is similar to operant conditioning in that the learner is quite active, and reinforcement can affect whether someone observes and then displays this behaviour. Okay, so that PowerPoint was much shorter than the others. That's it in terms of the next SAC for learning. But of course, don't forget that research methods and forgetting are on the next SAC as well. So now might be a good chance to go back and have a look at the videos in relation to forgetting. But I will remind you of that in class so you don't forget. Okay, I'll see you in class. Catch you later.